Welcome to HR Voices, a podcast for independent HR and people professionals and the businesses they support. HR Voices is brought to you by the expert team at HR Independence Limited. We hope you enjoy.
Hello, welcome to another edition of HR Voices podcast. I am your host, Mary Asante, and with me here today is the fabulous Katy McMinn. Hi, Katy.
Hi, Mary.
So today we have the joy of talking about psychometrics and how psychometrics can help organizations, as well as how HR consultants can use psychometrics as a tool to enhance how the services they deliver to their clients. So, Katy, before we dive into the topic, can you introduce yourself and tell us a bit more about what you do and who you are?
Yep, thanks, Mary, and thanks for inviting me to be on today. Lovely to talk to you. So I'm Katy McMinn. I run an HR consultancy called Task HR, and primarily I work with small to medium businesses across the UK, supporting them not just in terms of staying compliant, managing risk, but also in terms of developing their culture, embedding those processes as well to properly engage, develop and retain their talent. And in terms of today's topic, so psychometrics, yes, that's something that I've always had a bit of an interest in, something that I use within my business and I use with my clients. So it'll be good to talk about that today.
Excellent. Thank you for the introduction, Katy. And as we go into the topic, for anyone listening to us, I think psychometrics are getting more and more used within businesses for various reasons. And how would a business use psychometric tools?
So, as you say, I think lots of businesses are working with psychometric tools now. I think they've always been around. I remember the first time actually I came across them, it was when I was a teenager, actually. My dad came home one Christmas, and I think he'd been taken through one of these psychometric assessments at home, and he brought it home like it was a family quiz or something. But it was a little bit terrifying at the time because nobody really talked about them. Whereas now, most people will have had some kind of experience, whether they've done sort of a personality assessment online or it's been involved in a recruitment process. So psychometric assessments, basically they're standardized tests that are designed to measure sort of behavioral styles, mental capabilities, sometimes that personality and emotional intelligence. But typically organizations will use them for lots of different reasons. As I say, first off, people come across them sometimes through that recruitment process, that selection process, but they're also used for development purposes as well. So if somebody's looking to develop themselves, develop their career, then they can be really helpful in terms of looking at those areas of strength and those areas potentially where they need to build that self-awareness and maybe work on a particular development area. But where they're also really helpful is from a team perspective, and actually that's where I quite enjoy using them as well. So thinking about how we all work together and that understanding of ourselves, understanding of others, and how having that understanding can really break down some of those barriers, really promote those and support really positive team dynamics as well.
Great. Thank you for that extensive explanation of how businesses can use it. And it is very important, isn't it? So whether it's recruitment, bringing people into businesses, development purposes, identifying where people's strengths and weaknesses lie and how you can support them in a team context to find out what complementary skills and strengths lie within the team to work out how you can really support them. At leadership level, tapping into the emotional intelligence, how leaders work together, etc., also helps. And even when it gets to restructuring, sometimes psychometrics can be used in terms of determining who is better suited for roles that are available for the businesses going forward. So they've got a wide range of use for businesses, whether it's a small business or multi million or global companies.
Yeah.
So it's got a scope that way. And in terms of tools, there's so many out there, aren't there?
There really are, and that's the thing. And it's funny because you'll go into some organizations and you'll have discussions around psychometrics, and they will say organizations will sometimes have their favorites that they use. There are lots and lots out there. It's not really for me to say you should use this one or this one today, but I would say as a consultant, it can be a really good thing to get accredited in some of the specific tools. I'm accredited in some of the personality tools, so Golden, for example, is one of those. On the emotional intelligence side, there are lots of those out there as well. Again, not saying you should go out, but one of the ones that I'm accredited in that I really like is the Roche Martin Emotional Capital assessment tool. So there are lots out there. A lot of them are quite similar. Lots of people will have heard of DISC and used that. Lots of people love the models that use the colours. And that's because actually that makes it accessible. It makes it easy to understand. The one that everybody tends to know is the good old Myers-Briggs. That, again, it has its use. It's done some fabulous things. There is that danger of sort of pigeonholing people, and also people trying to remember what all those letters mean, who they are, what they are. So for me, it's about finding a tool that everybody can relate to quite easily, that it's easy to understand, and that actually you can use it for positive purposes, not about, as we've talked about offline, Mary, with these, it's not about putting people in boxes. It's about a tool to help explore, and the most important thing is help people build that self-awareness going forwards.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And there are tools out there, and you are absolutely right in pointing out whether the consultant, the manager, or whoever is deploying these tools is trained
Yeah.
or accredited to use them to interpret the outcome, the results. Because if when used well, they are extremely helpful tools. But if they are not used correctly, they can be more problematic than provide solutions, right?
Yes, absolutely. And it's a really key point. So, as I said at the beginning, lots of people will probably have gone online at some point and done a personality assessment and then looked at the results. And yes, that can be insightful. It can be a bit of fun sometimes, but actually, to make sure that these are being used properly, it is important to make sure that when, as a consultant, certainly, that you are accredited in a particular tool. There is the psychology behind it, there's the ethics behind it that's important to be aware of. Every tool will have its nuances as well, but for somebody to be accredited, it means that they've been properly trained in what psychometrics are, how they should be used, but also importantly, how you actually interpret what comes out the other side. So yes, you will go on and complete usually a sort of an online assessment, and then that will generate a report. So the way I work with them is I wouldn't then necessarily just send that report to the individual. I would then set up a feedback session, which is like a coaching session, really. And we would then go through that together and explore some of the outcomes, some of the information that's come out of it, because there's lots of things that need to be taken into consideration as well. So the mindset that person was in when they completed it, for example, that can impact how somebody's responded. Even the context of how and where they sat it, were there lots of distractions so they were quickly running through things, all of those kind of things. But also when it comes to actually some of the outcomes, properly exploring. So if they have come out as slightly lower when we're talking about empathy, for example, if we're looking at the emotional intelligence, well, let's explore that. Why is that? And I think also another really important point is that there are no right or wrong answers, and that can be the danger when people are interpreting them themselves, or they're interpreting them with somebody who isn't trained, is that what we're looking at here is it's about self-awareness. It is about, as we mentioned, focusing on and identifying those areas potentially where they can really capitalize on, use them more, or underdeveloped areas, not necessarily saying somebody can't do something or can't respond in a particular way, but it may be that their preference is a certain way. And so uncovering that, building that self-awareness means that people can consciously look into those areas, consciously actually bring those out a little bit more. But that comes from having those in-depth feedback conversations to explore and understand some of the context around all of it.
I think that is a really important point, that once you get a report, really the next step is to sit down with a trained individual, a trained professional, to help you interpret the results, because written material can have so many different interpretations to them that one can look at it and go, wow, okay, this. And especially when it comes to either the ones that put people quite simply in boxes,
yes,
or assign red, green, amber, yellow, whatever. And you hear this time and time again when you're talking to people, oh, I'm blue, I'm red, I'm this, this. And the danger is that, okay, what does it really mean, or what does it truly means, red to be blue, when you're interacting with somebody who is green or whatever? What does it really mean? If on a scale of 1 to 10, if you're coming up as a 5 for empathy, what developmental opportunities does that present in context of the role, the environment, the culture, and everything else? So there is more to the results and the interpretation than just, okay, you read and you go take it as gospel and put it down and you say, right, from now on, this is what I am, and let's just go with that.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's funny because there was a tool that I've used. Again, it's using the colors. It's slightly different. It's a US one called True Colors, but I remember they talk very much about everyone having a color spectrum. And it's not that you're in a box, that you've got all of those colors, so to speak, in you, but actually you have those sort of habits or those preferences. Your natural style would be to be more orange, for example. And it's about recognizing and helping people recognize. So, you know, in those more natural situations, this is your sort of typical way of responding. But actually, by recognizing where a situation might need something different, actually you can pull on those different areas. So if you're not typically a very data focused person naturally, that doesn't mean that you can't deal with data. It just means that actually you pull on that skill or that side of yourself when it's needed. And I think, as you've said as well, a lot of it is about self-awareness of ourselves, but it's about how we understand each other as well. And so thinking about when we're communicating with each other, okay, well, how do I like to be communicated with? Yeah, that's important. But also, what about those people in my team? How am I going to get the best out of them? Or how am I going to communicate most effectively with them? So, for example, if there is somebody who isn't that data focused person, then actually you shouldn't be going to them with a huge complicated spreadsheet, because that's not going to get the best out of them. So it's building that understanding, and that's where from a team perspective it can come in really helpful as well.
Absolutely. Thank you for highlighting that as well. So in terms of HR consultants, how can HR consultants make the best use of psychometric tools as part of the consultancy services they offer to their clients?
So as an HR consultant, the first thing is actually making sure or choosing an appropriate tool that you can be accredited in. So that's the first thing, going back on being properly trained. That's something that you need to make sure that, so that first of all, you're going in there as a trained, qualified person. And that's obviously going to give you that credibility with clients as well. And then really it's talking to your clients and thinking about and exploring potential opportunities where actually these psychometrics can add value. And that's what we're looking to do here. It's not doing things for the sake of doing things. It's where can they actually add value to a process. I think a key part is to say they shouldn't form the whole process. So they shouldn't be the only tool that's used in recruitment. They shouldn't be the only tool that's used for development purposes. But looking at things from a holistic perspective, they can really add value. I think so. Working with your clients, understanding what it is that they're wanting to achieve and looking for those opportunities. So we've mentioned recruitment. So they can be really helpful from a recruitment perspective, really can help make those better hiring decisions, because you can look at the specific role that a client's recruiting for, look at what are the actual abilities that you're looking for, look at what that role's going to require, and then you can use those psychometrics to explore that a bit further. The key thing I'd say there is, what I'm not suggesting is you ask a candidate to complete one of these assessments and then automatically dismiss them because, for example, it says that they are not the most outgoing, collaborative person. Now, you need to relate that back to the role to find out, well, actually, do they need to be in that particular role, and use it as a tool to explore it further. So that's one of the ways where HR consultants can think about how can we improve the hiring processes and make those better hiring decisions. Also from a developmental perspective, and certainly leadership as well. So if you're working with clients, if you're looking at those potential future leaders, they can be great in terms of building that self-awareness, building those areas, identifying some of those areas that individual might like to focus on. Again, sometimes people can be technically great, but have they got the skills and the emotional intelligence, which I think we all know now from lots of the research that we've seen out there is so important for successful leadership. What is their level of emotional intelligence? And using psychometrics can help identify some of that. It is actually a skill. It is actually something that you can work on and build. So it's not to say that someone can't improve it. It's not to say that someone can't improve and enhance their emotional intelligence, but it starts with that self-awareness. So again, using that as part of that development piece can be really powerful, and it can then be used obviously as part of a coaching program as well. It can be a great way to kick off a coaching program with somebody because you've got that sort of baseline. It identifies some of those areas that you might want to explore going forwards. And then the other areas we mentioned is on the teamwork side. Again, effective teamwork it's required in every single organization. Every team will have different personalities in there, different styles, and that's great. That's what we want. But if there isn't that understanding of those differences, then that can sometimes lead to those clashes. It can lead to people not communicating as effectively with each other. So using those psychometrics in a team environment can be fantastic in terms of unblocking some of those issues, as well as actually bringing teams together to have a bit of fun, break down some of those barriers, bring people together. And again, as an HR consultant, one of the things you can do is go into organizations to offer those, to run and facilitate those sessions. And I have to say, that's I love doing those kind of sessions. I always come out of those really uplifted because you see so many people having those moments where like, oh yeah, I hadn't thought about myself like that, or oh, now I realize why myself and this particular colleague, we never seem to come to an agreement, and now I see why. I'm presenting my information in not the best way, or I'm not understanding where they're coming from. So those are some of the things I think that HR consultants, we're perfectly positioned to offer this kind of support using those tools, but it comes from finding the right tool that you relate to and you feel comfortable with, getting accredited in it, and then getting it out there to your clients.
Very well put, Katie. And also, I just want to add to the fact that, as we said, not that there's so many tools out there, finding the right tools for you is very important, but also recognizing that you can work collaboratively with other consultants as well. So you may not be trained in all the tools, or the tools that, because sometimes you do come across clients who would prefer to use a specific tool, and that might not be the tool that you are trained in. So it might be good to reach out to other HR consultants who are already trained. The HRI community, the HR independence community, is a great community to tap into for, hey, I'm looking for somebody who is either Dex trained or use an emotional intelligence tool, or a
Yeah.
tool that I use that I know not a lot of HR consultants use for my coaching and for development work with my clients is EBW,
Oh,
Emotional
yeah.
at Work, and I love it. It's great
Yes.
because it doesn't put people in boxes, and that's why I love it the most personally. And just reaching out to people to say, hey, I've got a client who is using, or I'm doing this piece of work. Is there someone who's trained to do it, who would work with me either as an associate, a partner, or whatever on this particular project? It's important to remember that you don't necessarily have to do it all on your own all the time.
Yeah, absolutely. And that is a great point, isn't it? Because when you are running your own consultancy, you're doing so much anyway. So and I think that's talking about the HRI community. I think that's what's quite special about it, the collaboration. And I've seen that where people have actually gone out and said, I need somebody who can deliver a disc session. And that's great because then, as you say, you've got people who literally do that every day, and so you can then bring in that expert. They can work, as you say, either as an associate or in some vein there, and that can work really well. And it allows you then to meet the needs of a client, definitely, if they want to use a specific tool as well. So yeah, absolutely.
That's great. Thank you, Katie. And the other aspect of it is if we can just look at in terms of, I want to break it down because we've got individuals, teams, and organizations. So how might the individual benefit from psychometrics? Then we'll explore how teams, I know you've touched on it, might benefit, how the organization as a whole can benefit from psychometrics.
So individuals massively benefit from psychometrics. So again, and I'm talking specifically more around the personality and the emotional intelligence ones. Obviously, we've got some of the other tools that sit under this umbrella, but if we're thinking about the sort of the personality and the emotional intelligence, again, I keep talking about self-awareness, but for me, that's at the heart of it. It all starts with that, and that's what lots of these assessments focus on, is it's building up your own awareness of who you are, what your particular sort of preferred style is in situations, what are your go-to behaviors and responses to things, and developing that understanding of yourself in terms of how you may behave, how you may respond in those everyday situations. But also it's important as well to understand how you might behave or respond, what your preferred style is actually when you're under pressure as well. And I think that can be quite an important one, because we can all be that calm, measured, empathetic individual when things are going really well, when everything's going smoothly. But actually, what happens when it all goes wrong, because that is going to happen, or what happens when you're dealing with lots of uncertainty. We talk about that phrase, the one certainty at the moment is change, is uncertainty. So we have to be able to respond to that. And so it starts with that self-awareness. So individuals, I always encourage people, when I'm taking somebody through an assessment, before I even ask them to do that, and before we set that up, we have a chat about why are we doing this. And again, different individuals will have different goals, and I think it's important to uncover those first of all. So are you doing this just out of interest? Are you doing this to improve your own personal effectiveness? Or are you thinking about how you interact with others? Are you thinking about future development, future progression as well? So understanding an individual's motivation, I think, is really important. I think it's also about just making sure that individuals understand how it all works. So, okay, how the assessment works. So they will be asked a series of questions that they respond to. They shouldn't sit and deliberate for ages over each question, but try and flow through that. Again, no right or wrong answers, so to speak. Understanding who their comparison group is going to be. So with lots of these tools, you will be able to select different norms, so to speak. So whether it's general working population, whether it's manager, leadership level, and that can obviously all change the output, so to speak, from those assessments. So for individuals, it's understanding the motivation, understanding that they know how the tool works. And also, I think sometimes to try and make sure that people don't feel defensive, because it's a natural response, isn't it, to feel a bit nervous and wanting to push back on something if you don't think it's not what you want to hear. reminding people that actually this is based purely on how you responded to this. It's based on your answers, and that's why again you have that feedback session to explore that. And typically, and I'm sure with your experience as well, Mary, you'll say the same, typically people can sometimes go in a little bit either nervous, sometimes a bit cynical as well, and you start that feedback session with them and you start going through it and you see people go, oh my goodness, this is true. That is me. I do recognize myself. And then even when you have those points where to start with, they look at it and say, oh no, I don't agree with that. And then we start exploring it. And suddenly they'll start saying, actually, you know what? Yeah, you're right. When I do think back to this situation, I probably did respond in that way. It was because of XYZ. And you start seeing that pattern come out. So for individuals, I think it's getting them really comfortable with understanding why they're doing it, understanding the tool, how it works, and then understanding what you do with the output. And that ultimately is going to be down to them. You can provide that feedback, you can do that in a coaching style. And ultimately, then it's about them deciding, how am I going to take this forward? How am I going to try and bring out some of those areas of strength potentially? How am I going to think about particular areas that I want to focus on? And that can be really helpful, especially if somebody is looking to develop that leadership path, is going to move into that leadership role, having to manage people, having to motivate, inspire people. That's going to be really important.
Excellent. Thank you, Katy. And a fascinating topic that we can probably keep talking about for hours.
Yeah.
What would you say are your top 3 tips for anyone listening to us?
I would say top 3 tips: be clear on what you're using them for. And certainly remembering, as we've touched on as well, don't use them to pigeonhole people. Certainly so thinking about, everybody's got preferences, everybody's got a style, but it is about enabling people to flex that. So by pigeonholing somebody, you're suggesting that they can't do something, and that's not the case. What these tools do is uncover areas where people can be more aware, be more conscious, and make conscious efforts in different areas. So that's the one thing, not pigeonholing people. I would say making sure, again, as I mentioned, not using them in isolation. So certainly, for example, with recruitment, they shouldn't, in my opinion, they shouldn't be used as a yes or a no for a candidate. They should form part of that holistic view and approach. So being clear on what that job role actually is, and then thinking about, okay, so what would be the sort of the style and the preferences that we feel might be successful in that role, and then exploring that with them rather than that yes no. I think the other one, we haven't touched on it, and I know we're running out of time, but it's probably a whole other podcast, to be honest, is I think being aware of how you use psychometrics and neurodiversity as well. I think if they're not properly used, or if they're not used with an understanding and an awareness of neurodiversity, they could present some risks to...
That is definitely another podcast, and maybe we can have you back and we can get into details, because that's neurodiversity generally is the topic close to my heart anyway. Yeah. So
yeah, absolutely. I think that probably is a different subject, but just being aware of that. And again, that goes back to some of the things I'm saying about the pigeonholing, about taking a holistic view. But I think from a neurodiversity perspective, it's taking it up that level and thinking as well about, well, okay, thinking about, are there any adjustments that you might need to be thinking about, the conditions of the assessment, and also selecting the right tools. There are some tools out there that are focused on being neurodiversity friendly, so to speak, have those populations in there as well. So there's lots of things that we can explore on that side as well.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Katy, for your time and for taking us through psychometrics, and also offering to come back again as a guest. And thank you, everyone, for tuning in. If you've enjoyed the podcast, please share with your network and give us a fantastic review. Would love to hear from you if there's any specific topic that you want us to talk about, or you'd like to come on as a guest. Thank you, and speak to you again soon. Bye.
Bye.
We hope you enjoyed this episode of HR Voices. If you have a topic you'd like us to cover or would like to be a guest, we'd love to hear from you. Connect with us on social media or email us at hrvoices@hrindependence.co.uk. Tune in next time.